说有这么个奇怪的现象啊。
There's a strange phenomenon. Once the lockdown is lifted, the pandemic disappears. Once the one-child policy is lifted, people stop having babies. Once the purchase restrictions are lifted, housing prices drop.
跪着买来的房子，哭着卖出。
Acquiring houses is no simple feat. Sellers part with them in tears, yet in the future, you can't even get rid of them. Too many developers. Housing prices might slash by 4 or 500,000 yuan overnight. Even before the houses were delivered, they had already lost 4 or 500,000. Making 4 or 500,000 is hard, you know it. But losing 4 or 500,000 only takes one night.
The Chinese economy is facing a severe downturn, and the decline in the real estate market is a significant factor. The real estate crisis has also exacerbated the debt crisis of local governments. According to data released by the People's Bank of China for the full year of 2023, the asset size of People's Bank of China has been steadily increasing since July 2023. In July 2023, the asset size was 40.8 trillion yuan, and by December 2023, it had surged to 45.7 trillion yuan, an increase of nearly 5 trillion yuan in 6 months. It is almost equivalent to the total increase over the past 8 years. In comparison, from 2015 to 2022, over 8 years, the asset size of the People's Bank of China increased by only 7.8 trillion yuan. Some experts argue that although the CCP authorities deny flooding the economy with economic stimuli, they are actually quietly adopting a quantitative easing policy. Quantitative easing is a non-traditional monetary policy adopted by central banks. It is aimed at stimulating economic growth by increasing the money supply, with effects similar to lowering interest rate. During economic recession or downturn, central banks typically employ this monetary policy. While conventional interest rate policies tweak the liquidity of financial systems, quantitative easing is a potent tool employed by central banks to ramp up the internal monetary liquidity of economies. Simply put, QE involves the rapid and extensive printing of currency by central banks. So, what assets did the central bank purchase in its quantitative easing over the past year? A glance at the changes in the composition of assets held by the People's Bank of China over the last 6 months revealed that there has been little fluctuations in the scales of items like foreign exchange, gold, national bonds, and other foreign assets. The significant growth comes from the category labeled claims on other depository corporations. This particular item accounts for nearly 5 trillion yuan of the total QE volume. Claims on other depository corporations refer to the debt formed by the central bank against financial institutions like commercial banks, policy banks, and credit cooperatives. These can absorb deposits after executing monetary policy operations. The People's Bank of China, PBOC, conducts monetary injections through methods like reverse repurchase agreements, relending, rediscounting, medium-term lending facilities, and collateralized supplementary lending. Debt securities. They refer to all bonds and credit assets such as refinancing other than gold and foreign exchange that meet the criteria for pledging to the central bank. Prior to 2014, the scale of claims on the other depository corporations were relatively stable, comprising only about 4% of the total assets of the central bank. However, after 2014, the scale of the PBOC's claim on other depository corporations entered a steady expansion period. PBOC data shows that by December 2023, the balance of claims on other depository corporations on the balance sheets of the PBOC reached 18.6 trillion yuan, accounting for approximately 41% of the total assets of the PBOC, hitting a record high. It's worth noting that in 2015, the Chinese Ministry of Finance and the PBOC jointly issued a document that included bonds issued by local governments into the scope of collateral for the central treasury. Therefore, it is speculated that aside from tens of trillions of yuan in the bank credit assets, over 70% of the underlying assets of the PBOC's claim on other depository corporations may be local government bonds. However, over the past year, the finance of local governments across China have faced tremendous challenges. In order to borrow new funds to pay off old ones and provide funds for numerous projects, local governments have collectively issued 9.3 trillion yuan in local government bonds. According to the December 2023 insurance and debt balance of local government bonds released by the Chinese Ministry of Finance on January 30th, by the end of December 2023, the balance of local government debt nationwide reached 41 trillion yuan, nearly one-third of China's GDP in 2023. What's frightening is that this figure is still expanding rapidly. Data indicates that in 2023, the issuance of local government bonds nationwide reached 9.3 trillion yuan, an increase of about 27% year on year, reaching a historical high, nearly 2 trillion yuan more than in 2022. However, a significant portion of the 9.3 trillion yuan in local government bonds has been purchased by commercial banks and then collateralized to the central bank, becoming part of the central bank's balance sheet. Mike Sun, a senior Chinese investment strategy expert and private investment advisor in the United States, analyzed that despite the CCP's denial of implementing the mass stimulus policies, it is in fact secretly carrying it out. This means that it is quietly implementing quantitative easing, essentially distributing money. Mike Sun told the Epoch Times on March 8th that the funds distributed by the CCP are not directly used for the real economy or infrastructure investment, but are used by local governments to repay debts, essentially borrowing new debts to repay old debts. Local governments have accumulated a large amount of debt, and many public officials in various regions are unable to get paid their salaries. Mike Sun said that issuing bonds itself isn't the issue. The problem lies in the buyers. In the past, these bonds were mainly purchased by foreign investors and private investors, but now the primary buyers of bonds have become commercial banks. Local government bonds are divided into two types based on their usage: new bonds and refinancing bonds. The funds from new bonds are mainly used to support major projects such as infrastructure construction, while the funds from refinancing bonds are used to repay the principal of maturing local government bonds or existing debts, commonly known as borrowing new to repay old. According to China's financial media, Yi Cai, the record-breaking borrowing by local governments last year was mainly due to the unprecedented scale of refinancing bonds. On one hand, the balance of maturing debt of local governments last year was large, and the fiscal imbalances of local finances were more prominent, making debt repayment more reliant on borrowing new to repay old. According to data from the Ministry of Finance, the principal repayment of local government bonds in 2023 reached 3.7 trillion yuan, an increase of about 32% year on year. Among them, the principal repayment of refinancing bonds reached 3.3 trillion yuan, accounting for 89.8% of the total amount due, an increase of about 38% year on year. Last year, local governments relied on refinancing bonds to borrow new and repay old, accounting for about 90% of the total. On the other hand, last year, in order to alleviate debt repayment pressure, the Chinese authorities allowed more than 20 provinces to issue a total of nearly 1.4 trillion yuan in special refinancing bonds. Data shows that in 2023, Guangdong continued to lead in bond issuance, reaching 687 billion yuan. Shandong followed closely with 631 billion yuan, ranking second. Hunan jumped into third place with 468 billion yuan. Jiangsu and Zhejiang ranked fourth and fifth with 458 billion yuan and 454.8 billion yuan, respectively. Anhui ranked sixth with 448 billion yuan. Sichuan, Hebei, Guizhou, and Henan also issued bonds exceeding 400 billion yuan. Compared to the principal repayment that can rely on refinancing, bond interest payments must be repaid using fiscal funds. After local investment payments on debt exceeded 1 trillion yuan for the first time in 2022, they once again exceeded 1 trillion yuan in 2023. According to data from the Ministry of Finance, local government bonds interest repayments reached 1.2 trillion yuan in 2023, an increase of about 9.6% year on year. According to estimates from global investment bank Goldman Sachs, the debt of China's local governments is projected to reach 94 trillion yuan, soaring from 62% of the GDP in 2019 to 76% in 2022. An article by Chinese affairs expert Wang He states that before 2019, the total balance of local government debt nationwide was less than 20 trillion yuan. However, by the end of October 2023, the balance of local government debts had surpassed the 40 trillion yuan mark, doubling in just 4 years, With such massive debt, local governments are fundamentally unable to repay, and in reality, they haven't even considered repayment. The pressure from debt interest payments alone is immense. The article points out that this is only the explicit debt of local governments. The bigger issue is the implicit debt, mainly consisting of urban investment debts, which authorities verbally deny but cannot shake off in reality. According to a Reuters report on January 19th, sources familiar with the matter revealed that the Chinese government has issued instructions to heavily indebted local governments, require them to delay or halt some nationally funded infrastructure projects to control debt risks. The core of the directive from the Chinese government is infrastructure projects, including the reconstruction and expansion of highways, airports, and urban light rail lines. The sources also mentioned that the Chinese government has instructed relevant provinces and cities to make every effort to reduce debt risk to the moderate and low levels. The provinces and cities that the Chinese government is most concerned about include Liaoning, Jilin, Guizhou, Yunnan, Tianjin, and Chongqing. Previously, China's financial regulatory authorities also ordered highly indebted local government financing platforms to stop issuing offshore bonds with maturity of 364 days, closing a loophole that had allowed some Chinese local governments to borrow recklessly last year. Reuters reported on January 8, citing 4 informed sources that local government financing platforms, as the name suggests, are tools for local governments in China to finance infrastructure construction. The total amount of financing by local governments through this platform has reached as high as 9 trillion, posing a risk to the already significantly slowed Chinese economy. Due to the sharp decline in revenue from land auctions and reduced channels for raising new funds, solving local debt and funding shortages through local financing platforms has become a new normal for China's local governments. However, the potential impact on the entire banking industry and market has begun to deeply concern China's regulatory authorities. During this year's 2 sessions convened by the CCP, the second session of the 14th National People's Congress held an economic-themed press conference on March 6. Foreign media expressed concerns about the high level of local debt in China and its impact on infrastructure, but Chinese Finance Minister Lan Foan avoided discussing the severity of this issue. Director of the National Development and Reform Commission of China, Zhe Shanjie, stated that achieving the 5% economic growth target this year would face many difficulties. The day before the March 5th, Chinese Premier Li Qiang announced in the government work report that to systematically address the funding issue of major projects in the process of building a prosperous country and national rejuvenation, China planned to issue special long-term bonds for several consecutive years starting this year, with an initial issuance of 1 trillion yuan. The special long-term bonds planned to be issued by China this time have 2 significant features. The first is their insurance period. In the bond market, bonds with a maturity of more than 10 years are generally called long-term bonds. The second is the special purpose of these national bonds. These funds will be used exclusively for the implementation of major national strategies and security capacity building in key areas. An article in the Wall Street Journal on March 7 pointed out that this crisis management tool will now become a routine source of funding, at least for the next few years. This marks a subtle but significant shift in China's economic management approach. Associate Professor Sun Guoxiang of the Department of International Affairs and Business of Taiwan, Nanhua University, suggests that this indicates that the original major strategic and key area security and capacity building in mainland China could be supported by universal bonds or the general national budget. However, now there is no longer the ability to support it. This shows that the Chinese economy has not recovered as expected and is worsening. Associate Professor Sun says that the Chinese Communist regime still believes that this kind of debt, such as national bonds, will definitely be repaid or will be profitable in the future. This is still based on the expectation that the mainland China's economy will continue to support it. Even if some local infrastructure has been completed, the stimulative effect on the economy will not be very rapid, and there won't be an overnight change from deflation to inflation. According to statistics from financial data provider Wind, as of the end of 2023, the total unpaid interest-bearing debt of Chinese local governments reached $5.5 trillion, which is only the disclosed data. Economists estimate that the range of debts outside the balance sheet of local governments is between 7 trillion and 11 trillion US dollars, with 400 billion to 800 billion US dollars having a high risk of defaults. China's local government have long relied on land sales as a main source of income, but due to the downturn in the property market, their income has greatly decreased. At the same time, developers are falling into debt crisis, forcing local governments to assume responsibility for guaranteeing the delivery of buildings. Japanese financial services firm Nomura Securities chief China economist Lu Ting estimates that there are approximately 20 million unfinished ghost houses in China. A report by Nomura Securities in mid-November last year believes that to complete the construction of those houses, approximately 440 billion US dollars will be needed. According to financial news magazine Barron's, there are currently millions of completed but unsold houses in China, and one housing official even said there might be over a billion. With house prices and sales falling, Chinese investments also declining. Developers are defaulting due to lack of funds, and perhaps most frustrating for some buyers is that they have paid in full for their properties only to find that the houses were never built. The worst hit areas are low-tier cities, where the biggest problem is oversupply, with too many houses and too few potential buyers. At the end of 2020, China's real estate market began to shrink, with deterioration accelerating in third and fourth tier cities. Purchases nationwide slowed down and oversupply became more severe, especially in smaller cities. Standard & Poor's analyst said in a recent report that they expect sales in low-tier cities to further decline by 9% in 2024, even with sellers lowering their prices. The real estate crisis has deepened the local government's debt crisis. In the past, land sales have been the main source of income for local governments, with revenues related to land sales typically accounting for over 30% of total local government revenue. During the period from 2019 to 2021, this ratio was about 40%. However, in recent years, the real estate industry has been in trouble, leading to a sharp decline in total revenue related to land by local governments. In addition, since the summer of 2020, Chinese developers have been hit by a series of debt crises, leading to many projects being stalled, and real estate investments, housing sales, and new construction have all plummeted. Current affairs commentator Li Yingyi analyzed that the Chinese Communist Party wants to rescue these unfinished construction projects, but according to foreign media estimates, this mess could cost tens of trillions of yuan. The more the CCP wants to save the property market, the more it will affect market confidence. If people's desire to buy houses decreases significantly, it cannot be ruled out that more people will sell their houses to cash out. This will cause a vicious cycle of property market price reduction, inability to sell, and further price reduction. Therefore, it is difficult for the CCP to save the entire mess of unfinished buildings. Coupled with the after effects, the CCP will be in crisis.